There is a specific kind of silence that lives inside old gun shops. It is not the silence of emptiness. It is the silence of things that have already said everything they need to say. The silence of wood worn smooth by 10,000 hands. The silence of steel that has cooled and hardened and waited. It is a silence that presses against your chest when you walk through the door, gentle and heavy at the same time, the way grief sometimes does. Harlan Creek Gun and Supply had that silence in abundance. The shop sat at the far end of Millbrook's Main Street, wedged between a hardware store that hadn't changed its window display since 1987 and a diner that smelled permanently of black coffee and fried onions. The building itself was old, the kind of old that had stopped being charming and started being honest. The wood panels along the front had faded from a deep walnut brown to something closer to ash. The hand-painted sign above the door had lost 2 letters over the years, and nobody had replaced them. The bell above the door still worked, though. It rang in a low, tired pitch every time someone entered, like an old man clearing his throat. Inside, the shop was long and narrow. Glass cases ran along both walls, housing everything from small-frame revolvers to hunting rifles arranged on velvet mounts. The fluorescent light overhead flickered occasionally, a quiet, rhythmic stutter that everyone who worked there had long since stopped noticing. The smell was oil and wood and something faintly metallic, something almost mineral, the smell of compressed history. Cole Maynard had worked at Harlan Creek for 14 months. He was 23 years old, sharp-jawed, and carried the particular confidence of someone who had learned a great deal in a short amount of time and had not yet lived long enough to understand what he didn't know. He had gone to a vocational program in Raleigh, graduated near the top of his class. He could strip and reassemble a Glock in under 40 seconds. He understood rifling, barrel harmonics, trigger pull weights, and could quote case pressures from memory. He was good. He knew he was good. And in the way that young men sometimes do, he had mistaken competence for wisdom. The shop's owner, Earl Harlan, was rarely around these days. He was 71 years old and recovering from a second surgery on his left knee. He checked in by phone most mornings and trusted the shop to Cole with a looseness that made Cole feel, privately, like he had already inherited the place in some unspoken way. Earl was a man of very few words and even fewer explanations. He had built the shop himself in 1978 and had never once advertised it. People found it the way people find things that matter, by word of mouth, by necessity, by following a thread someone else handed them. Cole didn't know much about Earl's past. Earl hadn't offered it and Cole hadn't asked. It was a Tuesday in early November when she walked in. The morning had been slow. A light rain was pulling itself across the sky outside, the kind that couldn't quite commit to being real rain, just a cold mist that made everything feel damp and muted. Cole had been behind the counter cleaning the display glass with a cloth that left more streaks than it removed. Half listening to the country radio station, crackling through the small speaker on the shelf behind him. The bell above the door gave its low, tired ring. She was somewhere in her late 40s, maybe early 50s. She wore a canvas jacket the color of dried pine needles, jeans with actual dirt on the knees, and boots that had done real work in real ground. Her hair was dark with threads of silver pulled back in a practical knot. She carried herself without performance. No hesitation at the door, no glancing around to get her bearings the way people unfamiliar with gun shops sometimes did. She walked straight to the counter like she had been here before, or like she had been in places like this before, which amounted to the same thing. Under her arm, she carried a rifle. She set it on the counter without ceremony. Cole looked down at it and felt the quiet, reflexive assessment that came naturally to him now. The kind of evaluation that happened in under 2 seconds, involuntary, like a doctor checking a pulse. His eyes moved across the rifle quickly. What he saw made something in him tighten with the suppressed need to say something. The rifle was old, deeply old. A bolt-action, long-barreled, with a wooden stock that had been cracked near the grip and repaired with what looked like wrapped wire and some kind of dark adhesive. The bluing had worn off most of the barrel, leaving patches of surface rust that had gone from orange to brown to something darker and more permanent. The rear sight was bent slightly, an almost imperceptible lean to the left. The sling had been replaced at some point with a piece of braided rope, stained and frayed at both ends. It was, by any reasonable commercial standard, a wreck. She said she worked over at Patsy's Diner, 2 blocks down. Said she'd come in on her lunch break. Said she'd inherited this rifle from her father and wanted to know if it could be restored, if it was worth restoring, and if not, what she could get for it if she sold it as is. Her name was Delia. She said it plainly, without offering a last name, the way people do when they're not sure anyone will need it. Cole nodded. He picked up the rifle carefully, turned it in his hands, ran his thumb along the barrel where the rust had settled deepest. He worked his jaw slightly. He tilted it toward the flickering light overhead and looked down the bore, then set it back down on the counter. There was a pause. It was not a thoughtful pause. It was the kind of pause that comes just before someone says something they've framed as helpful, but that lands differently than they intended. "I'll be straight with you," Cole said. He kept his voice professional, measured. "This thing is pretty far gone. The metalwork alone, the rust has gone past the surface in a few places. Stock's been damaged and the repair is rough. The sight's out of alignment. Whoever fixed this up along the way did the best they could. But this isn't really a restoration candidate in any practical sense." He set the rifle down again with a gentleness that softened the words slightly, but not enough. "I mean, it's a cool piece, sentimental, but functionally, I'd be doing you a disservice if I told you there was a lot here." Delia looked at the rifle on the counter for a moment. She didn't look offended. She didn't look hurt in any sharp way. She looked like someone who had been told things before that turned out not to be true and had learned to hold their reaction back until they were sure. "What about the make?" she asked. "Can you at least tell me what it is?" Cole picked it up again. He turned it over, looking for a manufacturer's mark. He found something stamped near the receiver, partially obscured by wear and the dark residue of that old adhesive repair. He squinted. He could make out partial characters, but couldn't place it with confidence. He assumed, from the rough profile and the bolt design, that it was some variant of a surplus military rifle, possibly a modified Mauser derivative. The kind that turned up at estate sales and barn cleanouts with some regularity. "Hard to say exactly," he admitted. "Could be a modified K98 derivative, maybe something post-war European. Without cleaning it down to bare metal, it's hard to pin. Whatever it is, it was a working gun once." He paused again. "It's not anymore." Delia was quiet for a long moment. She looked at the rifle with an expression Cole couldn't fully read. It wasn't grief exactly. It was something quieter, something that had already done its grieving a long time ago and was now just sitting with what remained. She said she would think about it. She thanked him. She started to take the rifle back. And that was when Cole made the mistake. It wasn't mean-spirited. He would understand that about himself later. But it was careless in the way that young certainty is always careless, not cruel, just unaware of its own weight. He said with a small, dry half-smile, "Tell you what, leave it here, have some of that diner coffee and come back in an hour. I'll write you up a fair estimate. Probably not worth much more than a wall display, honestly, but hey, at least it's got character." He meant it as lightness, as ease, but the words settled wrong. The tone of it, wall display, the slight lift in his voice. The implicit suggestion that this woman and this rifle were quaint and a little bit out of their league, hung in the air between them like something that couldn't be unsaid. Delia looked at him for just a moment. Then she nodded slowly and left the rifle on the counter. The bell rang its low ring as she walked back into the mist. Cole turned back to the rifle. He actually pulled it closer, examining it with the same confident dismissiveness he'd spoken with. He wasn't even really looking for answers. He was confirming what he already believed. That was the thing about arriving at conclusions too quickly. You stopped seeing what was actually in front of you. He didn't notice the small, worn initials carved into the underside of the stock. He didn't notice them because he wasn't looking. He set the rifle to one side, wrote the start of an estimate form, went back to cleaning the glass case. 45 minutes passed. The mist outside had thickened into something closer to actual rain. It tapped against the front window in a soft, irregular rhythm. The radio had drifted into static, and Cole had turned it off. The shop was very quiet now, the particular quiet of mid-morning on a slow Tuesday, the kind of quiet that feels like it could last forever. The bell above the door rang. Cole looked up. Earl Harlan walked into his own shop for the first time in 6 weeks. He moved slowly because of the knee, and he used a dark wooden cane that Cole had never seen before. But he moved with a straightness in his spine that made the cane seem more like punctuation than support. He was wearing a canvas jacket almost identical to the one the woman had been wearing, old brown boots, a gray flannel shirt. His face was deeply lined, the kind of face that weather makes over decades, and his eyes were pale blue and very clear and very still. He saw Cole. He nodded once, the way Earl always nodded. Then his eyes moved to the counter, and they landed on the rifle. Something happened to Earl Harlan's face that Cole had never seen happen there before. It wasn't dramatic. Earl was not a dramatic man. But the stillness in his expression broke, just for a fraction of a second, in the way that ice breaks before the crack fully forms, a hairline shift, invisible to anyone who wasn't watching closely. Cole was watching closely enough only because Earl had just walked in unexpectedly. Earl crossed the shop slowly, his cane tapping a quiet rhythm on the wooden floor. He stopped at the counter. He set his free hand down beside the rifle, not touching it yet, just near it. He looked at it the way you look at something you thought you would never see again. "Where did this come from?" he said. His voice was low, even, but there was something underneath the evenness, something pressurized. Cole explained about the woman from the diner, said she'd come in, left the rifle for an estimate. Said it was inherited from her father. Earl nodded slowly. His hand moved to the rifle. His fingers touched the barrel first, the rusted part, and he didn't flinch from the texture of it. He lifted the rifle and turned it over, and without hesitating, without searching for it, he turned the stock and looked directly at the underside of the grip. The initials were there. Carved small and precise, the way a young man carves something he means to keep. 3 letters in a neat, deliberate line. E.R.H. Earl Raymond Harlan. Cole didn't understand what he was seeing yet. He watched Earl's face and tried to read it and felt, for the first time that morning, the uneasy sensation of not being sure what was happening. Earl was quiet for a long moment. He held the rifle the way you hold something that once weighed more than it weighs now. He turned it slowly. Ran his thumb down the repaired crack in the stock, along that wound wire gently like tracing a scar. Then he spoke, not to Cole, not quite. More to the air between them and the rifle and whatever distance time had opened up. He said the rifle was a 1943 Winchester Model 70, pre-64 production. One of the last full production runs before the wartime manufacturing changes. He said that in its original condition, and it had once been in original, near-perfect condition, it would be among the most respected bolt-action rifles ever produced by an American manufacturer. He said the pre-64 Model 70 had a controlled round feeding system that modern production could not fully replicate. that gunsmiths and collectors had argued for decades about the superiority of its action, that people searched estate sales and private collections across the country hoping to find one. Cole's chest had gone very still. He was beginning to understand. Earl set the rifle down on the counter between them. He looked at Cole directly now, not with anger, with something worse than anger, with the specific patience of a man who has seen many young people be wrong about important things and has learned not to be surprised by it. "I carried this rifle," Earl said, "in service. And before that, my father's hands were the last ones to true this barrel before I shipped out." A pause. "He was a gunsmith, 40 years. He knew this rifle better than I knew it when I was your age." The silence in the shop was not the same silence as before. Cole opened his mouth and closed it. The estimate form on the counter felt obscene to him suddenly, its clean white blankness, the neat printed words at the top. Fair market assessment. "The woman," Earl said quietly. "Delia." He said nothing else about her for a moment, just her name, the way you say a name that carries a long story inside of it. "Her mother was my sister," he said. "She was the one who kept the rifle when I couldn't, when things came apart the way things do." He paused. "I haven't seen this gun in 22 years. I thought it was gone." Cole felt the full weight of what he had said to her land on him now, not quickly but in waves, the half-smile, the tone, wall display, the cheerful, dismissive ease of someone, explaining the value of something to a person who had carried that thing their entire life, without knowing what it carried back. He said, "Sir, Earl raised one hand slightly, not a harsh gesture, just a quiet stop. "She know?" Cole asked. "That I'm the original owner?" Earl exhaled slowly. "No. Her mother passed 8 years ago. Delia was told it was her grandfather's, which is true enough. It was in his hands before it was in mine." He looked at the rifle again. "She came here today without knowing." The weight of that landed differently than anything Cole had felt in 14 months behind that counter. The idea that the rifle had found its way back not through intention, but through the ordinary motion of a woman on her lunch break, walking through mist to a shop on the end of a street, carrying something she had been told was worth knowing about. The door opened. The bell rang. Delia walked back in, shaking rain off her jacket, her boots leaving small, dark marks on the wooden floor. She stopped when she saw Earl standing at the counter. She looked at him the way you look at someone whose face is familiar in a way you can't immediately place, the particular puzzlement of recognition without context. Earl turned to face her. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. It was Earl who moved first. He picked up the rifle from the counter and turned it in his hands, and then he held it out toward her, stock first, with both hands, the way you offer something you are done holding on to. "Your grandmother was afraid of this thing," he said. "She always thought it held too much of the world's bad business. But your mother," he stopped, steadied. "Your mother kept it because she said it held the person before the bad business. She wanted that part saved." Delia's expression was changing slowly, the way weather changes, not all at once. She looked at the initials Cole had never noticed. She looked up at Earl. Cole stood back from the counter, not because anyone told him to, because the space between those two people had become something that didn't need a third presence. He understood, with the uncomfortable clarity of someone who has just been taught something without being taught it, that expertise is not the same as knowledge, and knowledge is not the same as understanding, and that a rifle that looked like wreckage to him had been, to the people in that room, a thread running through time, holding shapes together that would otherwise have scattered completely. Earl told her he would restore it himself. He said it quietly without asking, the way you say something that is already decided. He said he still had the skills, bad knee and all. Said some things you don't forget how to do. Said it would take him a few weeks and she could come by whenever she wanted to see how it was coming along. Delia held the rifle for a moment longer. Then she handed it back to him. She didn't say much. There are moments that don't need much said inside them. She thanked him in a voice that was steady but contained something trembling at the edges. She looked at the rifle one last time before she turned and walked back toward the door. The bell rang. She was gone. Earl stood at the counter with the rifle in his hands. The shop settled back into its particular silence. Rain tapped at the window. The fluorescent light overhead gave its quiet, familiar stutter. Cole looked at his estimate form. He folded it once and put it under the counter where it wouldn't be visible. Earl eventually moved toward the back of the shop, moving slowly, carrying the rifle with both hands, not leaning on the cane the way he usually did. As though whatever the rifle gave back to him was enough to spare the knee a little. He didn't say anything else to Cole that morning. He didn't need to. Some lessons are not delivered. They are simply placed in front of you and left there, the way an old rifle is placed on a counter, worn down to something that looks like nothing, until the right person picks it up and shows you what it has always been. We spend so much of our lives assessing things by the surface condition we find them in. We see rust and call it ruin. We see age and call it obsolescence. We see a woman in work boots carrying a cracked and weathered rifle into a shop on her lunch break, and we hear the word inherited, and we think we already understand the whole story. But inheritance is not just an object passed from hand to hand. It is memory, moving through time, looking for somewhere safe to land. And sometimes it walks through a door we didn't even know was open.